in doing so, we physically and spiritually.
But the mic should be very close because sound is not.
So the favors of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala are supposed to acknowledge that. And so the greatest favor that anyone can have, first of all, is existence. If you ever think about the fact that we exist, in and of itself is an unprecedented favor. None of us actually really deserve to exist. Did you ever think about that? I mean, did any of you, or myself included, did any of us, put in an application that, oh Allah, I think that, I don't deserve to be created. First of all, that's not that created us. Out of his favor, he didn't have to do that. And then he created us as human beings, and he created us among the human beings. So the greatest ni'mah after wujud, existence, the purpose of that existence, which is not a common thing these days, which I'm going to elucidate a bit more later. So this is a journey that Allah is very kind to all of us and every human being, and so this is kind of an acknowledgement of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's favor upon me, which is a favor on all of us. So people ask me, were you born a Muslim? So the question is obviously yes. We're all born Muslims. كل مولود يولد على الفطرة فأبواه يهودانه وينصرانه أو يمجسانه. So every human being is born in a natural state of the capacity to accept, the lordship of his Creator, which is actually within. It's sort of within the if you will, for lack of a better term, the spiritual genetic makeup. Because every human being who comes into this world has actually already given an undertaking to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala that he accepts Allah as his Rabb. As is mentioned in the Quran, Allah asks us, am I not your Lord? When all of our spirits were assembled, in fact extracted from the progeny of Sayyidina Adam alayhi salam, and we all replied, why not? Definitely it is such. So our coming back into the world is to see who will remain upon that undertaking or not. Now, I was actually born in Cleveland, Ohio. I wasn't born in California. I was born in Cleveland. And my father comes from an Ashkenazi Jewish family from Hungary. And my great-grandfather, actually my great-grandparents, came from Hungary around the turn of the 19th century, the early end of the 19th century. And my grandfather was born here. He was actually the president of his synagogue, the Jewish, or another, but he wasn't that religious. I mean, he was just kind of like what we call the secular Jew. However, somehow my father, very early on, became a very staunch atheist. So, from my father's side, though they come from the Jewish tradition, but my father was a very staunch and very vocal atheist. From my mother's side, they were actually from a Christian background, and in fact, my great-grandfather was a Presbyterian missionary priest in India. That might interest you. Be of interest to many of you. And in fact, to this day, he's known in southern India for sorting out a lot of bandits and dacoits that were quite unruly during the British Raj, and he kind of sorted them out, so he's well known for that. In any case, and very interestingly, he, after coming back from India, he and his sister, my maternal aunt, who was an eye surgeon, an eye doctor. And she spent her entire life in India in the service of Christianity. She would go around and treat the people there to bring them to Christianity. She spent her whole life. People talk about we're going to go on the path of love for 40 days and these people sound very strange. I mean, it's a time-based thing or an objective-based thing. They went there, they gave their lives. She's buried there. In fact, she was the only one who really objected to me becoming a Muslim in all my family. She didn't even really know me. I didn't know her. But she heard in India that her great-grandnephew had become a Muslim. She would have flipped out. She would have been among them. Anyway, but my great-grandfather came back to America, and he was back in the 1920s. He was accompanying his children. His daughters had convinced him to take them on a picnic to Lake Erie. So he took them to Lake Erie, and there was a famous tornado that came. It's called the tornado, the Sandusky tornado. You can see it chronicled, actually. The tornado came and picked the car that he was in up and dropped him in Lake Erie. It happened to be a Buick, so the family had it in a Buick. Well, I don't know, he got to heaven or not, but he did wind up in the bottom of Lake Erie, that's for sure. So anyway, that's kind of the background. But my mother actually wasn't religious at all. And where I grew up, in fact, there was a synagogue behind where we grew up in a Jewish neighborhood in Cleveland. But I never saw the inside of the synagogue or the church for that matter. So very early on in my life, I once asked my mother, I said, people on Sunday, Saturday, they go to the synagogue, they go to church and stuff like that. I had no clue what people did there. So I said, why don't we do that? She said, well, if we did that, then we can't do the things we like to do on Sunday. We used to like to go out and have outings and things. So that was the end of that. And so as I grew up as a small child, there was no religion there was no concept of religion in our family. As a matter of fact, as I said, my father was a very staunch atheist, and religion was actually something you're not allowed to talk about in the house at all. And according to my father, religion is what has messed up the world, right, left, front, and center. It's the biggest problem. Give her a religion, and we'll be fine. Okay, in my childhood, I didn't question such things. But then when I was, and the other thing, so the two things that were very peculiar about our family was that, number one, most of my family, well, all my family were musicians. My father was a musician, my mother was a singer. And so that was actually religion, if anything. So music, and also my father was very fond of horses. So we always had horses also. And when I was a small child, you would sit in the Makkah in the Quran, and it would be a very tough party. Sabta, my father was a horse trainer also, among other things. And we used to have to train on horseback. We used to have to perform in the weekend horse shows. My elder sister and myself, we were small children. We used to have to perform that, and we used to have to perform. You'd have to come back with prizes. So those were the two things that I grew up with, music and horsemanship. In my very small childhood, we were in a more urban setting, but then by the time I was probably 5, 6 years old, we moved out to a more rural setting, something like this kind of an area, where we had 5 acres of large estate, and we had a big barn and corral for riding horses and training on that. And so also, our whole family was a musical group. My father, my mother, my elder sister, and myself. Then around 1960, in fact 1960, we moved from Cleveland to Colorado. My father and 2 other partners, they bought a big land in Colorado, and we started what is known as a dude ranch. Now, I don't suppose any of you know what is a dude ranch. The ranch where we grow dudes. Kind of. And actually, it's interesting because everybody says, do this, do that. But nobody knows where that really comes from. It's actually a cowboy term, which is what the cowboys would call the people who come from the cities and they don't know the cowboy lifestyles. They're called dudes. They put on a cowboy hat and cowboy boots and they're trying to play like they're cowboys. They're not. We call them dudes. Okay. So this ranch, it was a resort where people would come with their families, and for 1 week we would entertain them, and we would teach them horseback riding, and we would teach them riflery and archery and so many things that people do in the urban setting. They have this vacation. And in the winter, in the fall time, we would have hunting season. We would have guests who were hunters, and we would take them into the mountains of Colorado and hunting. So I had a very interesting childhood, actually. And as you can ascertain, it was spent mostly in the rural setting. And this was something that my favorite pastime was, that I used to be out in nature, in the mountains, and natural habitat, and I used to love it out there. So I wasn't really, I'm very lucky actually, in my childhood, that I grew up in the countryside. And I spent a lot of time, climbing up the mountains. We have big mountains on our property. And I used to climb up on those mountains. And I used to sit on top of these mountains and just looking at the creation. And in hunting in season, we would also take guests out for camping, and sometimes I would go by myself, and I would just go out and camp out in the wilderness. And I would just ponder over all of this creation. And it just seemed to me, if there's such a magnanimous creation, doesn't there have to be a creator? All of this just happened? Unfortunately, our youth, they live in this fantasy world of their phones and their gadgets. And we don't see it. Now, luckily, right around here, you have all this beautiful nature. I hope we're all reflecting on that. So, by the time I was 11, 12 years old, I started questioning this concept that there's no creator. This doesn't sound plausible. And then by the time I'm 15, 1965, so my mother and father, who were having issues for quite some time, ultimately they divorced, and we go with my mother to California because my grandparents, her parents, were in California, so we went to California. No, of course, California is where every musician wants to go, Hollywood, right? So I'm very excited. Because I was actually, from the time I was, a very small child, I was playing in the musical group with my parents, and we're traveling around in our region. But now I go to the center of show business in Hollywood. That was actually when I began high school. That was in 1965. But I didn't pay much attention. I never paid much attention to school because I never thought anything they were teaching me had any relevance to my life. So I was a very poor student. Not that I didn't read. I used to read a lot. If I was interested in something, I would read about it. But I wasn't interested in anything they taught me in school. Even the music class, that's the only thing I did reasonably well was the music class. But even that wasn't practical, it wasn't real, so I didn't really pay much attention to that either. But what I did do was I continued to make progress in my musical career, and I began playing different bands and different groups and recordings and what have you. And then ultimately in 1968 I went to Japan, and as a group we went to Japan for 6 months. We toured Japan, recorded records and TV appearances and what have you. So we were very famous in Japan. But I was becoming very disenchanted with the whole set. As I said, it's quite, the life of show business is quite different than the life of a young kid in the mountains, the Rocky Mountains. It's serene, it's natural, and this is a very unnatural life. At the same time, keep in mind that this is the 1960s. Now, the 1960s is when we had this big upheaval here in the United States. We had the Civil Rights Movement. We had the anti-war movement. So our generation were the ones who started questioning all these things, Before that, it was basically everybody came here for the American dream. One of the comedians from that era, he says, why do they call it the American dream? Have any clue? He said, because you have to be asleep to believe it. So what we're seeing, what people could, what was considered to be a dream turns out to be a nightmare, which is what we're seeing today also. So in that era, we saw this racism, we saw the class, racism, we saw, this bullying all over the world, and this tyranny and oppression and injustice. So our generation started questioning all these things. The gross love of materialism. Do you know that the hippies, people, they think these hippies are just these, useless fellows that have nothing better to do, and they just, just hang out and, take a lot of drugs, and there's nothing behind it. Actually, on the creator, but also the collective nature of it, and the unity they have. And then, Allah Akbar, like one body, we go on. Then, Sami Allahu liman hamidah, Rabbana lakal hamd, Allahu Akbar. When they all went into sajda, the religion has that in it, it has to be right. There's no way. This didn't come out of anybody's head. And I know what religion, obviously, it's Islam. So I know from that moment that that's what I'm looking for. But I came a long way to go meet these Coptic monks and moms of Ethiopia, so, I'm just looking. Okay, so we get to Sudan, and Sudan was amazing. I have a long story to tell about Sudan, and then ultimately I get to Ethiopia. Now, long story short, when I get to Ethiopia, I actually go to these monks. I find them actually. They're way up in these mountains, and these guys are like, the term zuhud, right? Abstention from the dunya. Oh my God, these guys have nothing to do with the dunya. I mean, they're in Nevada all day and night. They live on just weeds growing out of the ground, and these guys are, on steroids, But the interesting thing was, they don't have any light in their faces. This was perplexing. They didn't have mood. No, musicians, artists, we go by feeling, which does. We don't go by feeling, and we do by, scientific analysis. It just didn't feel right at all. So these guys, if they're untrue, then they can God, that should be enlightened, they should be not. Their faces were really weird. So, when I saw that, and at the same time, because now I'm attracted to Muslims, and you can see Muslims all across North Africa and in Ethiopia. By the way, half of the population of Ethiopia are Muslims. Where was the first Makkah? The first place of hijrah was where? Habasha. The king of Habasha, Najashi, Asham, he accepted Islam. Prophet prayed his janazah. The king of Ethiopia. The first colony of Muslims was in Ethiopia. Very interesting. And it was amazing, so. And also, around that time, I hook up with this guy, this fellow in Ethiopia. He used to put on this show, a show that he would put on these sport feats, like you could drive a car over it. You could put a big boulder and bash it. He had this really strong guy. So he had this show they used to put on. And so I was in some village in Ethiopia, and I was walking, and he met me. He said, okay, I do this show, and you're a musician, so why don't we, collaborate? You can play music, and I'll do my show. So we travel around villages in Ethiopia doing these shows. And interestingly, in every village or most places in Ethiopia, you'll have Muslims and you have Christians. And they don't get along with us so well also. So you listen to the. So this fellow was a Christian. Now wherever we went, I seemed to be attracted to the Muslims. Okay? And which he wasn't very happy about this guy. He was Alawite, and he wasn't too happy about that. So finally we came to some village. I So I'm walking down the street. It's a dirt road, it's a little village, and the main street is a dirt road, and I'm walking down the road. Somebody comes running up from behind and grabs me on the shoulder. He says, "We heard that there's some American Muslim in our town. Is that you?" So I thought, well, I don't think there's any other American in this town, so I thought it probably is me. I said, yeah, I guess that's me. So you're a Muslim? So he took my hand, he looked at it, he took it up. Yeah, you're a Muslim. I said, yeah. Now, I don't know if you can see it, but you see in my hand, you have 8 and then 1. It's very clear. And then 8, 1, 18 and then 8, and 99 names of them. Same musicians. Now, for a musician, hippie musician, all I needed was a little nudge. Okay. This is total nonsense, but Allah has His own way. So by that time, I just needed a push because already I was so in Islam. By the time I saw the Muslims praying, so I said, okay, this is the sign. Yeah, I was actually a Muslim, just like you. Okay, I'm Muslim. And by the way, people said, who gave you the Shahada? Nobody. Even this guy, his name was Adam. I remember his name. He was a school teacher. He was English. So he took me to his house, and all night long he's teaching me Alif Ba Ta Ta. He taught me that. So by the morning, I know the Arabic alphabet. He didn't pray Isha or anything, but I learned the Arabic alphabet. And now I decided, okay, I'm a Muslim, and also I was a vegetarian. Because a lot of us hippies, we were from the Hindu influence and from the Eastern, we became vegetarians. I was a vegetarian for years. So this Adam, he says, but our Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him. So I ate meat after years. I got really sick and I threw up. I said, it's okay. So now I decided, okay, now I'm a Muslim. I'm going to go back to Addis Ababa and study Arabic and learn. So I go back to Addis Ababa and I go to the central. We don't have anybody from Ethiopia. So I go to the central Addis Ababa and I take a little room over there. And I'm trying to find somebody to teach me how to pray. And all these, young fellows who are laborers, none of them know how to pray. It's the house of the Muslims. So one of them said, look, we don't know how to pray exactly, but what you do is just go to the mosque and just watch what they do. Just follow them, do what they do. So I decided to go to the masjid, and it so happens that this is Salat al-Jumu'ah. So my first salat in Islam is Salat al-Jumu'ah, the main masjid. So I go, and already the khatib was giving the khutbah, so I came in the very end, and it was in the last row, and then after the khutbah, obviously we make the prayers, and so I just have to follow them. It's easy. Lord, whatever they were doing, and I did that. Now, when I finish from that, then I'm leaving the masjid. So now, I see the people are doing the sunnah and nawafil. So I thought, okay, I'm supposed to do that. So I tried to remember how I did that in the masjid with them. But I kind of messed up, so I didn't. So people were watching me. And by the way, Ethiopia has a tradition of fear of colonialists. Yeah, they were the one place in Africa where they were not colonized. The Italians were there for 7 years and they kicked them out. So now I'm trying to make my prayers the best that I can remember, but I was making mistakes, obviously, or something. So they start gathering around. I thought, oh my God, my first prayer, my gosh. And miraculously, after somebody comes up and says something. So now, then from there I went to a place called Jiradawa in Harar, which is a very wonderful place, centers of in the mountains actually, and a lot of ulama, and basically Muslim areas and so I stayed in Ethiopia for about 6, 7 months. And however, in Harar, as I said, the Ethiopians can't figure out why am I there. So the intelligence agencies were watching me. because I don't look much like an Ethiopian, so and he's an American, So every day they were taking me and interrogating me, what are you doing? I said, I'm looking for religion, I'm listening. Come on. What are you doing? They didn't believe that. And every day it was happening. Finally, I left from there, my friends from Ethiopia, they said, well, this is the problem. Our country is run by other people, and we're going to have a lot of time supporting them. So I leave from Ethiopia, I went to Yemen, and I think in Yemen I could say that that's where I first, there in Yemen, they take me under their wing and they start teaching me. Ultimately from Yemen, then the Hajj came. So they said, okay, go with us to Hajj. And I said, I just became Hajj. I thought, you got to really be. So anyway, I went to Hajj on the boat. And from Hudaida, and about 2-3 days later, I get there, I'm really sick. And they actually had to carry me off the boat. In those days, Jeddah was like a little village. Now. So then ultimately I performed Hajj and I wanted to stay there in Hajj. After Hajj, and I wanted to stay in Medina and study there in the Jamia, which was a very small Jamia. Shaykh Ahmad was the rector. Interesting, that I was telling my friend that so when I came, I wanted to stay there. So the Sheikh told me, he said, okay, you want to stay, that's fine, but you have to change your visa. So you have a Hajj visa, you have to change it for a student visa. So what you do is, after Hajj is over, then when the king is sitting in his majlis, you just go there and explain that to him. That's how it was. It's very simple. You could meet the king, quite a different scenario than we have today. I don't think meeting the king is so easy, right? So anyway, I intended to stay there, but then I came down with pneumonia and hepatitis, and I had this abscess in my liver that burst, and then my lung collapsed, and it was like I thought that was probably it. The doctor would have survived that. But after 2 months in the hospital in Jeddah, which they didn't have a very primitive setup, that I had to go back to America for an operation on my lung. And so I ended up coming back. Actually, I never wanted to come back to America. I had never wanted to see the country. But I found myself back. And so, back in America, back in Los Angeles, I studied the Arabic language in Los Angeles City College, downtown Los Angeles. And after a year of studying the Arabic language, then I take off and head back to Medina. And then in New York, on the way, I meet up with Tablighi guys, and they hijacked me. I ended up going to India and Bangladesh. Ultimately come back to America and get married. And then again, finally by 1978, when I was able with that, now with the whole family, and my children were back in Makkah, and studied Makkah graduation, and I was sent to Pakistan. In 1985, where I've been basically stationed since then, I'm back here since about 2020, based back in California. That's kind of the khulasat of the story. And the long version, I'll wait for the book. Any questions? Which kind of thing is a question? Huh? How long was I in Yemen? About 3-4 months. Are you from Yemen? I originally went to Taz, and then I went to Sana'a. At that time, at that point in time, Yemen was in two factions. So you had northern Yemen, and then southern Yemen was under communist rule. It was hard for me. I didn't get a chance to go.
What was your main aim to do like this long problem
To find the real religion. To find the real religion.
Oh, but that was not your business of musician.
No, as a musician, I kept on playing all along. In fact, I took my guitar to art. Fortunately, I didn't play it. Yeah, I didn't actually leave. So when I came back to America, I was composing Islamic music. But I started, but I wasn't going to go back to nightlife. soon as I got back, people were on the back of me, you gotta be here. So I didn't want to go back to nightclubs and all that kind of thing.
Jim, did you say that you are in the process of writing a book?
What's that? Yeah, there's a book in process. I've done a
I'm
lot
looking
of.
forward to it this summer, or the travel log.
Yeah, it's inshallah.
What's the title of the book?
I haven't really decided on it.
I'm definitely looking forward to it.
Huh?
Where were you from?
Karachi. I still have a house in Karachi. A third of my family
What were you doing?
teaching.
Where?
Originally, I was sent from Saudi Arabia to Nuri. Canada, the Nuri Islamiyya, the Nuri. Famous because I taught there for about a few years. And I also taught in the madrasa known as Madrasa Aisha Siddiqa for ladies. So, yeah, that's basically what I started a business there. You might have seen Al Khair Miswak. That was my company. I started that in the 90s.
Japan
First people in Pakistan to start processing vacuum packing.
mountain is there.
Unfortunately, I knew of him, but I came to Pakistan the first time in 1979. He died. I was aware of them, but unfortunately, I came to India in 1973. So. Yeah. Ready to go? Yeah. And yeah, so I still have a house there in Hawkskin. Oh, it's so far. It seems to be. Yeah, I lived in Noorja. I lived in right in Sabir Wali Masjid. I lived right across the street from there. Yeah. We lived in that area for 35 years. But I'm from California and I have a love of the sea. Surfing, diving, still at the night. So I have a property out in Hawksville. Kareem, I never met Kareem, but we're from, as a young musician, he was playing for UCLA at that time. When he was, who else? I know of him, I've never met him. Yeah. What's that? Huh?
You still teaching?
No, I've been since 2020. In 2020, I took a job as the director of the Islamic Center in Tustin, Southern California. So, I still consider myself a Southern Californian.